It is June 10th, 2019. It is 85 years today, this day, June 10th, that Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson met and started Alcoholics Anonymous, which was the very first recovery group ever. Now, there are over 400 types, including the one we have, actwithcourage.com. But we owe a debt to those two men who today came forward and met each other and in humility started helping people throughout the earth. So my humble thanks to both of you men for your service to all of us, for me and for my daughter and all the people that I know. I'm grateful. Today is 28 years, 11 months and 16 days for me of no masturbation and no affairs. That's my sobriety definition. That's what defines the physical limits, the parameters of what I consider being sexually sober. And I'm very pleased and humbly grateful to have that sobriety time behind me. Today, we're going to make a video for two men, two of my favorite sponsees. One is named Mighty Mac from San Francisco, and one is named Oliver from Denmark, previously from Iceland. And they want to know about relationships, and particularly codependency in relationships. I want to talk about my very first relationship. My first relationships started when I was 4 years old. And my first memory of a female. Now, I'm going to talk about male-female relationships, but if you're gay, so we don't make judgments about people, and we help people no matter what their sexual gender orientation. Just substitute him or her, whatever the case may be. But for me, since I'm heterosexual, just to keep it simple, I'm going to say she, because that's my particular orientation. Not the only orientation, not the best, but it's mine, and I claim it. So when I was 4, there was a girl down the hill named Susan. And we lived in this lower middle-class white neighborhood in Alexandria, Virginia, over on the east coast of the United States, where my father worked at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And there at the bottom of the hill, there was this old rednecky guy named Tom, and he had this girl who was so pretty. She was 5 years old. And I went down the hill went to her room, and she invited me in. I'd never talked to a girl, never been to a girl's room, and she had all these sweet-smelling aromas and powders and perfumes and all these cushions and Afghans and throw pillows and everything was soft and it smelled like heaven. And I had never had any kind, and her voice was sweet and soft and little girlish, and I had never heard a voice like that. And she had long hair and she was thin, and she looked and she sounded and she had pretty eyes, and I was just entranced. And after about 5 hours, her mother finally said, "You got to go home." So I went marching up the hill. My heart was kind of broke. So the next day, I went down the hill again to talk to Susan, because that was a fabulous experience. But here was the beginning of my troubles with relationships when I was 4. Susan wasn't there, but Susan had a sister who was 3. Now, she had longer hair than Susan, and she was actually prettier than Susan. And she had her own room, but it wasn't quite as pretty or as feminine as Susan's, but it would do. And so I started hanging around that day with Pam. Now, by this time, Pam and Susan's mother had gotten the idea that something wasn't quite right here. So after an hour and a half, instead of 5 hours, she said, "Steve, you got to go home." And I went back home. Now, the moral of the story was this was a lesson that was to be repeated all my life until I got recovery. Until I got 31, until I got 28 years and 11 months and 16 days ago. Until that day, this lesson would repeat all my life. And that's if one woman wasn't available, I would go to another woman. And my life began to sound like this. That's what it began to sound like relationally. This. All my life until I got into recovery. And I feel sad about that. So that was my very first experience. Now, at 5, I went into my first grade and I became glommed on to a 3rd grader. Now, this would be another theme for me. Like my betters, like Beethoven. Beethoven really wanted a great relationship, but he was from a lower caste. He was a musician, which back in the day was the same as a servant, the same as you curry comb horses, or you take out there wasn't plumbing, so you carry out the waste, the feces and the urine of the masters, or you peel the potatoes or dress the mistress, but you weren't an equal. You weren't an equal. And Beethoven thought, since he was such a great genius, that he was an equal to all these wealthy people, and he wasn't. And so he'd fall in love with these women who were way above him, way outside his caste, and they break his heart. So he was by himself. He never got married, never had children. He never was in a relationship his whole life, because he was fishing in a pond where he had no business being. He was out of his league, and this was the first time I would do that. I was in the first grade, and I was in love with somebody who's in the third grade. Her name was Shirley, and all I remember about Shirley is she had a red furry coat, and she would pay attention to me when I was on the a playground. We would have recess back in those days, and I would hang around her and just glomming onto her to have the attention, the recognition, the idea that somebody cared about me, and they noticed me, and they liked me, and admired and respected me. This was long before sex. Long before sex. This was codependent and relationship addiction. And that relationship went fine, as long as we get to recess, and as long as I was in the first grade. But eventually, I graduated from the first grade, and Shirley was gone, and my life once again went like this. Because I couldn't have somebody outside of me validating me, saying in nonverbal terms, I love you, I care about you, I see you, I respect you, I want to be with you. That's what she was saying. My need for love and belonging was getting met by her just playing with me. But when she was gone, I felt hurt. I couldn't have told you this. I felt hurt and needy and lonely and sad and hurt. And I was just isolated. It was bad. So those are two examples of bad relationships. In the next video, we'll talk to you about some more. Just remember, this is the way that sounds. See you in the next video.